This was back in 2012. I was living in a 3-bedroom apartment with my best friend Lisa and another roommate Derek, along with 2 cats, Mango and Jojo. Over the past few months, the newspapers had been full of stories about a guy sneaking into young women's homes in the south end of my city. They would wake up to find him watching them sleep, or also see someone peering through their windows. Usually, he just looked, sometimes he spoke, and his actions eventually progressed to sexual touching. He would always flee before police arrived, and usually before the women involved could even fully grasp what was going on. We lived on what was technically the north end of the city, though it was kind of on the edge, and although Lisa and I were technically in the creep's target demographic, neither of us were students, and we weren't an all-female house, so I had never worried about it. About a day or two before the incident, the papers reported that the suspect had been arrested. One Saturday night, Lisa was working the overnight shift at our local fast food restaurant, and Derek and I watched some Scrubs, and then both of us headed to bed around midnight. I woke up to the sound of the apartment door opening at some point. I assumed that Lisa was coming home from her shift, but glanced at my phone and saw it was only about 4 o'clock in the morning. Lisa's shift didn't end till 7. An off feeling immediately crept over me. I wondered if I had dreamt the door opening, but I knew I hadn't. Even though every part of my subconscious was screaming that something was wrong, the rational side of my brain won over. Maybe the shift had been especially quiet. Since Lisa's work was so close to our home, they might have let her go home early, or she might have been sick. It was also possible that Derek had gone out without me noticing and was now returning. I had also thought that I had maybe heard him leaving before, although it wasn't like him to be up so early. I realized that I hadn't heard the click of the lock. This meant that whoever had arrived or left hadn't locked the door behind him. This wasn't entirely unusual. Both Lisa and Derek were from small towns and hadn't quite gotten the hang of locking the door behind them now that they were in the city. I decided that since I was up, I should at least lock the door. I opened my bedroom door to peer out. I was wearing a tank top and underwear and didn't want to make Derek uncomfortable. As I opened the door, I found myself face to face with a man, and his hand was reaching out for my bedroom doorknob. I must have startled him because he took a step back. I'm not sure why I didn't yell or scream. Maybe I was too scared. Instead, in a calm voice, I asked, "Who are you? And why are you in my apartment?" My brain was rushing to rationalize this guy's presence. He was around my age. Maybe Lisa or Derek had forgot to tell me that they were letting a friend stay over. But no, Lisa was at work, and Derek had gone to bed when I had. Maybe he was drunk and wandered into the wrong apartment. It would explain the goofy grin on his face, except that as I looked again, that grin wasn't goofy, it was manic. He didn't answer me, so I asked him again, "Who are you, and what the hell are you doing in my apartment?" No answer. He just kept grinning. I can't remember what his hair color was, though it might have been a reddish blonde. I couldn't tell you what the color of his eyes were, what he was wearing, or whether he had anything in his hands. I have a weird sense when I look back on it, though, that there was something in his hands. A weapon? A bottle of beer? I have no clue. Because his smile was completely and utterly terrifying that I can't remember anything else. I suddenly remembered that Derek was down the hall. I realized I could call for help. Instead, I told him, "You need to leave now." He kept grinning, and my heart kept racing. He was too close to me for me to be sure that I could close my bedroom door against him. He kept on grinning, but he turned and left. I waited a few seconds, then I leapt the distance between my bedroom door and the apartment door, flinging the deadbolt and sliding the chain into place. I retreated back into my room and texted Lisa to let her know what had happened. The next day, my roommates both reported that they had not given anyone permission to enter the apartment. They also both agreed to be more careful about locking the door. That morning, I read in the newspaper that the police had released their suspect in the sleepwalking case because there was no proof, although one guy was eventually arrested and charged in connection with the case. Differing victim reports suggest that it was more than one man that got up to this creepiness in my city around that time. I was in Cohutta, a north part of the Georgia wilderness, for 7 days scouting for bears, wild hogs, and deer, preparing for a hunting trip later that year. I had hiked in about 10 miles and then went off trail for another 3 to 5 miles. Basically, I was out in the middle of nowhere. Since I was alone, I was using a hammock that has a built-in bug net and had a rain fly over it. I saw 3 to 4 good-sized bears and about 10 hogs, and came across some good-sized deer. On the 4th day, I was going to head down to a small stream that I had marked on my GPS, and then set up camp, restock on water, and prep for the 2-day hike back. I could have gone faster, but I wanted to be able to look for any animal signs along the way. As I was approaching the small stream, I noticed a tent, which I was excited to see, as I had completely been alone for the past few days, and it's always nice to run into another hiker. Generally, us wilderness folks are pretty down to earth. As I got closer to the tent, I noticed that there was a small pack on the ground just outside of it. I figured that the person couldn't have been far away from where the camp was, so I set up my camp about 30 yards away, and within about 4 hours, daylight left. I started cooking some dinner, and 2 hours later, I was starting to wonder where this person was, given that this was in the wilderness, and it was a 1+ day hike out. There wasn't much I could do, but I did hike around the site, making a circle as I went out to look for any signs of a struggle, in case of a bear attack, or maybe they had an injury. I got about a quarter mile from the campsite, walking in a circle, but I didn't find anything. As night came, no one showed. I started a fire, in hopes that the person would be able to find where they set up. Fires burn very bright, and are very easy to see from far away. After eating, and searching, and hoping that the person was going to make it back, I called it a night. I had a small flask with me, and took a couple of sips of whiskey, jumped in my hammock with my pistol, and attempted to go to sleep. I sleep pretty hard, really hard, regardless of where I am. It literally annoys my friends, because I can always seem to fall asleep, and stay asleep regardless of where in the world we are. But this night was different. I felt like something was off, but I figured it was just me worrying about this person, who, by all accounts, was completely missing. So, for the first time in my life, I woke up to the sound of what I thought was footsteps, but not in the sense of footsteps on leaves, but what a heavy-footed person would make walking on an old wooden floor. It was extremely loud. I got my gun, grabbed my headlamp that was all stored in a compartment above me, and waited to see if it would stop. Right at that moment, it did. Then I saw something that scared the shit out of me. On my rainfly, the gleam of a flashlight, faint, but it was there. I shouted, "Hello?" And right when I did, it sounded like 10 people suddenly running away from me in every direction. I dropped out of my hammock onto the ground, frantically turning on my headlamp, shining it all around me. My heart was racing pretty bad, but I thought that it might have just been a reflection of the moon on the rainfly. Yeah, that was it, and the footsteps running away from me was probably armadillos, even though their eyes shine and they are pretty easy to spot. Problem was, there was no moon. I had never seen an armadillo above 2,000 feet. Not to say they don't live up there, I've just never seen one. And for some reason, the campsite I set up by was now gone. The fire had been put out by water, and it was apparent because there was not a damn coal in the thing. I thought for sure it was about 4 a.m., but I had only been asleep for about an hour. At this point, I wanted to leave, but hiking out in the wilderness while it's dark is always a bad idea. So I grabbed my flask, took a swig of whiskey, removed my rainfly so I could see out of my hammock and around the area that I was in, and tried my hardest to go back to sleep. I was lying down when I saw some light hit the trees above me. It was clear it was coming from downstream, and I got out of my hammock and started yelling, "Hey, y'all need any help?" I saw whatever was putting out the light, and it spun around and started heading downstream really fast. At this point, my body had pumped through more adrenaline than it had blood, and I was exhausted from it all. I finally was able to fall asleep and woke up at around 7 a.m. When I did, I noticed that my water filter I had left outside was missing. It's gravity filter, and it hangs on a tree filtering water down into my bladder that I put in my backpack, and my water bladder, sitting at the base of the tree, looked like it was cut down the middle with a knife. They cut down my bear bag, which had food in it, and took some of it. The creepiest part of it all is that they went through my bag, which was under my hammock while I was sleeping. I checked the bear bag before I went back to sleep the second time, and it was still there hanging, and my bag under my hammock hadn't been touched. I packed all my stuff and hightailed it out of there, keeping my pistol close by and moving as fast as I could. I ended up making the hike back in just under 15 hours. I hiked part of the trail in the night because I wasn't about to spend another night out there. I didn't see anyone on my hike out. There were no cars parked at the trailhead, and the DNR said that they had only seen my car there. A little backstory. I used to live in a moderately safe neighborhood. We had the occasional burglaries, but nothing out of the ordinary. At the time, I was 17 years old, and my boyfriend and his friends decided to call me in the middle of the night while I was with my friend Stacy for a sleepover. My boyfriend told us that they were nearby 7-Eleven and wanted to meet us. Bear in mind, it was around 10 p.m. We were pretty reluctant. They convinced us by offering us free food. Yes, I know, but we were teenagers, so we decided to meet him. Stacy's parents were away for the weekend, so it wasn't a problem for us to go out. We got to the 7-Eleven by 10:30 and got some food and sat around outside. It was quite late, and if I can remember properly, it was around 1:30 a.m. when I decided that it was time to go back. Stacy was pretty trashed, and I had a couple drinks myself, so naturally, we decided we couldn't drive home. In retrospect, I feel extremely stupid for ever going out there at night, and I completely regret it. We were only a couple blocks from home, so we decided that we would walk back. We were just past the corner we turn on to go to Stacy's house, and all of a sudden, we hear a loud, "Hey girls!" We both quickly turn around, and saw probably a middle-aged man, around 6 foot tall, walking towards us. It was 1:45 in the morning, and this guy was wearing a gray shirt and some shorts. I came to the realization that it was not at all normal, and that we should probably walk faster and ignore this guy. In the shock, we both had sobered up, and we had come to our senses, so we started walking faster. By this time, we were about 4 houses down from her home. Stacy turned around to see that the guy was following us quite quickly. He was saying stuff like, "Hey girls, come here. You girls sure run fast. You girls stayed at 7-Eleven for a very long time." By now, I was freaking out because he must have followed us back from 7-Eleven and we didn't even notice. He was running pretty fast, and it was dark, so all we could hear was quick footsteps on the sidewalk. I didn't want him to know where we were staying, so we rushed behind one of the trees and waited. Yes, it was really dumb, but we had no other choice. We thought it had worked, because he had stopped following us and walked back around the corner. We waited for another 10 minutes, just to be sure, and ran back home. As soon as we got in, we double-locked the door, turned all the lights off, and rushed upstairs. Stacy's house had a pretty secure backyard with high fences and a padlock gate, so we felt safe. We both were petrified, so naturally we didn't want to fall asleep. I called my boyfriend and explained what had happened, and he said it was just some druggie. Nevertheless, I broke up with him a week after the incident. About a half an hour later, we heard a large bang coming from inside the house. At that moment, Stacy and I were about to go to sleep when we heard it. I grabbed the nearest weapon to me that I could, so I opened the door a little bit to see nothing in the corridor, so we assumed it must have been the wind or something. Don't judge, but we were still pretty out of it and exhausted. Just as we were about to close the door, we heard the back door slide open. This person was actually in our house, and now Stacy started crying. Adrenaline pumped through me as I ran down the hall and threw the weapon down the stairs. We heard it drop to the bottom with a thud and shuffling, then the back door slid open and closed again. I was absolutely screaming my head off, yelling. After about 15 minutes of silence, we decided to head downstairs quietly to check what had happened. Apparently, someone had broke the glass in the kitchen by throwing a rock through it, and that was the bang we heard, and then they unlocked the slide door. We knew that the person was still out there, so we decided to call the cops. They came around 20 minutes later and called it forced entry. Stacy's parents came home early after we told them what had happened, and they got extra locks for every door in the house. I'm still quite cautious whenever I come back from any store past 8:30. Stacy was very reluctant to leave the house at night after that, and after high school, we lost contact.